The morning sun cast long shadows across the riverside shooting range as Jessica Martinez adjusted her grip on the worn leather steering wheel of her pickup truck. 3 months out of the Army, she still woke up at 0500 hours every day, muscle memory refusing to fade. The transition to civilian life had been rougher than she'd expected, and today's visit to the range was supposed to be therapeutic, a therapeutic chance to reconnect with the precision and control that had defined her 8 years as a sniper. Jessica had heard about Riverside through a veterans forum. Best long-range facility in the state, someone had posted. What they hadn't mentioned was the boys' club atmosphere that hit her the moment she walked through the front door. The rangemaster, a stocky man in his 50s named Dale Henderson, barely looked up from his paperwork when she approached the counter. His gray beard was stained with coffee, and his eyes held the dismissive glint she'd seen too many times before. "Help you?" he grunted, not bothering to make eye contact. "I'd like to reserve some time on the 1,000-yard range," Jessica said, keeping her voice steady. "I brought my own rifle." Dale's eyes flicked to her slight frame, 5'4" and barely 130 pounds, then to the hard case she carried. A smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. "1,000 yards? You sure about that, sweetheart? We've got a nice little 100-yard range that might be more your speed." The condescension in his voice made Jessica's jaw tighten, but she maintained her composure. "I'm sure. I qualified expert marksman in the Army." "Army, huh?" Dale chuckled, finally looking directly at her. "Well, this ain't basic training, hon. This is a serious facility for serious shooters." He gestured toward a group of men clustered around a nearby table, their voices carrying over the sound of distant gunfire. "See those guys? They're regulars. Been shooting competitively for years. They might not appreciate having their concentration broken by someone who's still learning the ropes." Jessica felt heat rise in her cheeks, but kept her expression neutral. "I'll take my chances." Dale shrugged and slid a clipboard across the counter. "Your funeral. Range fees $60 for the day. Safety briefing starts in 10 minutes whether you need it or not." He emphasized the last part with another smirk. As Jessica filled out the paperwork, she could hear the men Dale had pointed out earlier. Their conversation drifted over in fragments talk of win calculations, bullet drop, and upcoming competitions. She recognized the terminology, the easy confidence of people who knew their craft. What she also recognized was the moment they noticed her. Well, one of them said, his voice carrying just loud enough for her to hear. "Looks like we've got company today, boys." Jessica glanced up to see 3 men watching her with expressions ranging from amused to skeptical. The speaker was a tall, thin man with graying temples who wore a jacket covered in shooting competition patches. His name tag read Rick Thornton, Range Safety Officer. "Don't mind them," Dale said, though his tone suggested he was enjoying the attention. "They're just protective of their territory. Been the top shooters here for years." Jessica handed back the clipboard, her signature sharp and precise. "I'm not here to step on anyone's territory. Just want to shoot." "Course you do," Dale said, filing the paperwork with exaggerated care. "Just remember, this isn't a game. Long-range shooting requires patience, skill, and respect for the weapon. One mistake out there, and you could hurt yourself or someone else." The warning was delivered with the tone of someone speaking to a child, and Jessica felt her military training kick in the ability to remain calm under pressure, to assess a situation without letting emotion cloud judgment. She was being tested, sized up, dismissed before she'd even had a chance to prove herself. "I understand," she said simply. As she walked toward the range, rifle case in hand, she could feel their eyes following her. The whispered comments were just loud enough to reach her ears. "This should be interesting. and wonder how long before she gives up and goes home. Jessica had faced out before. In basic training, in sniper school, in the mountains of Afghanistan where her skill had saved lives. But this felt different. This was supposed to be her sanctuary, her place to reconnect with the part of herself. That made sense. Instead, she was walking into another battlefield. She found her assigned lane and began setting up her equipment with practiced efficiency. The rifle was a custom-built .308, each component carefully selected and tuned. As she adjusted the bipod and checked her scope, she could hear Dale's voice carrying from the front desk, regaling someone with what was clearly becoming a story. About the little lady who thinks she can shoot long range. Jessica closed her eyes and took a deep breath, feeling the familiar weight of the rifle in her hands. She'd been through worse than this, much worse. But as she prepared for her first shot, she couldn't shake the feeling that today would be about more than just hitting targets. The question was, would she be ready for whatever came next? The safety briefing was a humiliation disguised as protocol. Dale Henderson stood at the front of the small classroom, his presentation clearly tailored for Jessica's benefit. While the three regular shooters, Rick Thornton, Mike Patterson, and Steve Coleman, lounged in their chairs with bored expressions, Dale launched into an elementary explanation of basic firearm safety. Now, for those who might not be familiar with proper rifle handling, Dale said, his eyes fixed on Jessica, the business end of the rifle is the part that goes boom. We keep that pointed downrange at all times. The men chuckled, and Jessica felt her face burn with embarrassment. I'm familiar with, Jessica began. Please hold all questions until the end. Dale cut her off. Safety is serious business. Here at Riverside, we can't have anyone getting hurt because they thought they knew better than the rules. For the next 20 minutes, Jessica endured explanations of concepts she'd mastered years ago. Proper stance, breathing techniques, trigger, control. Dale peppered his presentation with condescending asides about beginners and people who think they know guns because they've watched movies. The worst part was watching the three regulars exchange amused glances every time Dale made another dig. When the briefing finally ended, Jessica approached Dale. I served 4 tours in Afghanistan as a designated marksman. I think I can handle. Look, honey, Dale interrupted, his voice taking on a paternal tone that made Jessica's skin crawl. I'm sure you did your part over there, but combat shooting and precision shooting are 2 different animals. Out here, we're talking about real marksmanship, discipline, patience. He glanced at the other men, who had gathered near the door. These gentlemen have been perfecting their craft for decades. They didn't learn from some weekend warrior instructor. Rick Thornton stepped forward, his smile not reaching his eyes. Dale's right. Military training is fine for what it is, but competitive shooting is a whole different world. We're not just spraying bullets at targets 100 yards away. My longest confirmed kill was at 847 meters, Jessica said quietly. The room went silent for a moment. Then Mike Patterson, a burly man with calloused hands, let out a low whistle. That's a hell of a story. Got any proof of that? Jessica felt her military ID and deployment records burning in her wallet. But something in Mike's tone, the skepticism masked as casual interest, made her pause. I don't carry my service record around for entertainment. Course not, Steve. Coleman chimed in. He was the youngest of the 3, maybe early 30s, with the kind of easy confidence that came from never being seriously challenged. Look, we're not trying to be difficult here. It's just that we've seen a lot of people come through claiming all sorts of things. Talk is cheap, you know? Dale nodded sagely. That's exactly right. This range has a reputation to maintain. We can't have people making wild claims and then embarrassing themselves or worse, creating dangerous situations. Jessica felt the familiar weight of doubt pressing down on her shoulders. It was the same feeling she'd experienced in every male-dominated space she'd entered throughout her military career. The constant need to prove herself, to be twice as good, just to be considered half as capable. "I understand your concerns," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "But I'd like the chance to shoot. That's why I'm here." Dale exchanged a look with Rick, some silent communication passing between them. "Tell you what," Dale said finally. "Why don't you start with some closer targets? Work your way up. No sense in wasting expensive ammunition on shots you're not ready for." "I specifically requested the 1,000-yard range," Jessica replied. "And I'm specifically suggesting you start smaller," Dale shot back, his friendly facade slipping. "This is my range, and I make the calls about what's safe and what isn't. You want to play with the big boys? Prove you can handle the basics first." Jessica looked around the room at the four men watching her, their expressions ranging from amused to challenging. She could feel herself at a crossroads. Walk away now, and she'd be admitting defeat before she'd even started. But staying meant subjecting herself to more of this death by 1,000 cuts, each small humiliation designed to make her doubt herself. "Fine," she said finally. "I'll start at 500 yards. Dale's grin was predatory. "Now you're being reasonable. Rick here will keep an eye on you. Make sure you don't get in over your head." As they walked toward the range, Jessica could hear the whispered conversation behind her. The words "attention seeker" and "probably never even deployed" reached her ears, each one landing like a physical blow. Rick caught up to her as they reached the firing line. "Look," he said, his voice lower now. "I don't want you to take this the wrong way, but shooting is harder than it looks. The guys who excel out here, we've put in thousands of hours, tens of thousands of rounds. It's not something you just pick up because you spent some time in the desert." Jessica nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She began setting up her rifle with methodical precision, each movement automatic and efficient. The familiar ritual helped center her, pushing back against the voices, trying to make her small. "Nice setup," Rick admitted grudgingly, watching her work. "Custom job?" "Built it myself," Jessica replied, checking her scope adjustments. "Ah." Rick seemed genuinely surprised. "Well, we'll see how it shoots." Jessica settled into position, feeling the familiar weight of the rifle against her shoulder. 500 yards. Child's play compared to what she'd done in Afghanistan, but apparently she had to prove she could walk before they'd let her run. The first shot rang out, and Jessica watched through her scope as the bullet struck dead center in the target's bullseye. A perfect hit. Behind her, she heard Dale's voice. "Lucky shot." Jessica chambered another round, her jaw set with determination. Lucky shot. She'd show them lucky. The second shot hit dead center, right through the hole made by the first. The third shot expanded the hole slightly. By the fifth shot, Jessica had created a single, ragged opening in the exact center of the target that could be covered by a quarter. The range had gone quiet except for the distant sound of other shooters at the shorter distances. Rick Thornton stood behind Jessica, his expression unreadable as he watched through his binoculars. Dale Henderson had joined them, drawn by the unusual silence from the group that usually filled the air with commentary and advice. "Wow," Dale said finally, his voice carefully neutral. "That's some decent shooting." "Decent." Jessica bit back her response and began reloading. She'd just put 5 rounds through the same hole at 500 yards, and it was decent. "Wind's pretty calm today," Mike Patterson observed, having wandered over from his own lane. "Not much of a challenge." Steve Coleman nodded in agreement. "Yeah, 500 yards on a day like this is pretty forgiving. Real test comes when you've got crosswinds and heat shimmer to deal with." Jessica stood up from her shooting position, her rifle still warm in her hands. "I'd like to move to the 1,000-yard range now." Dale's friendly facade slipped entirely. "Hold on there, eager beaver. You shot one group at an easy distance. That doesn't make you Annie Oakley." "I hit exactly where I was aiming," Jessica said, working to keep her voice level. "I've demonstrated I can handle the weapon safely." "Safety's more than just hitting the target," Rick interjected. "It's about understanding your limitations. 1,000-yard shooting is a different beast entirely. Variables you haven't even thought about come into play." Jessica felt the familiar frustration building in her chest. In Afghanistan, she'd made shots that these men couldn't dream of, under conditions that would have them crying for their mothers. But here, in this sterile environment with its manicured grass and painted targets, she was being treated like a child with a dangerous toy. "I understand the variables," she said quietly. "Do you?" Dale's voice carried a challenge now. "Because I've seen overconfident shooters make mistakes that cost more than just embarrassment. You missed the target backstop at 1,000 yards, and that bullet can travel for miles. We've got residential areas beyond the tree line." Jessica's military training kicked in the ability to read terrain, to calculate angles and backstops, to understand the deadly potential of every round fired. "I've read your range safety manual. I understand the backstop limitations and the angles of fire. I'm not going to put anyone at risk." "The manual," Steve scoffed. "That's cute. You think reading a manual makes you ready for long-range precision?" Shooting, Mike stepped closer, his bulky frame looming over Jessica's smaller stature. "Look, I don't want to hurt your feelings, but you're out of your depth here. This isn't basic training. We're talking about precision shooting at distances where the slightest mistake gets magnified into a complete miss." "Or worse," Dale added, ominously. "We had a guy last year. Thought he knew what he was doing. Overconfident. Put 3 rounds over the berm before we could stop him." Sheriff's department wasn't happy about finding bullet holes in someone's barn. Jessica felt the weight of their skepticism pressing down on her like a physical force. She'd faced enemy fire, had made life-and-death decisions in split seconds, had saved lives with her marksmanship. But here, surrounded by men who questioned her every move, she felt smaller than she had since basic training. "I'm not that guy," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "No," Rick agreed. "You're not. You're someone with even less experience trying to jump straight to the deep end." He gestured toward the 1,000-yard range, where the targets looked like tiny specks in the distance. "That's not a place for proving points or working through whatever you're trying to prove to yourself." The words hit Jessica like a slap. Whatever she was trying to prove to herself. As if her desire to shoot long range was some kind of therapy session. Some attempt to work through emotional issues, rather than a legitimate desire to practice a skill she'd mastered in combat. "I'm not trying to prove anything," Jessica said. But even as the words left her mouth, she knew they weren't entirely true. She was trying to prove something, to herself, to them, to the part of her that wondered if her military skills meant anything in the civilian world. Dale seemed to sense her uncertainty. "Look, I tell you what, why don't you come back next week? Spend some time at the shorter ranges, get a feel for how we do things here. Maybe Rick can give you some pointers on precision shooting techniques. Work your way up gradually." It was a dismissal wrapped in false concern, and Jessica recognized it for what it was. They wanted her gone, but they were trying to make it seem like their idea was for her own good. "I can shoot 1,000 yards, Jessica said, her voice stronger now. "Maybe you can," Rick said, his tone suggesting he doubted it. "But can you? Do it safely? Can you do it consistently? Can you do it without getting rattled when things don't go according to plan?" The questions hung in the air like a challenge. Jessica looked at the 4 men surrounding her. their expressions ranging from skeptical to hostile. She thought about the soldiers she'd served with, the trust they'd placed in her skills, the lives that had depended on her ability to hit targets at distances these men couldn't imagine. "There's only one way to find out," she said finally. Dale shook his head. "That's exactly the kind of attitude that gets people hurt. You think this is a game? Think you can just walk in here and demand to play with the big boys because you've got some military stories?" "They're not stories," Jessica said, her voice carrying an edge now. "They're facts. And the fact is, I can outshoot every one of you at any distance you want to name." The words hung in the air like a thrown gauntlet. The men exchanged glances, and Jessica saw something shift in their expressions. What had been condescending amusement was hardening into something closer to hostility. "Is that right?" Mike said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You think you can outshoot us?" Jessica met his gaze steadily. "I know I can." Dale's laugh was harsh and humorless. Well, looks like we've got ourselves a real hotshot here, boys. Tell you what, Princess, you want to play with the big boys? Let's see what you've got." The challenge was set for the following Saturday. Word had spread through the range's regular community, and Jessica arrived to find nearly 30 spectators gathered around the 1,000-yard range. The crowd was almost entirely male, their faces wearing expressions of anticipation mixed with skepticism. Dale Henderson stood at the center of it all, clearly relishing his role as ringmaster. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced with theatrical flair, "we've got ourselves a little competition today. Our military visitor here thinks she can outshoot our best. So we're going to put that to the test." Jessica felt her stomach clench as she realized the scope of what she'd walked into. This wasn't just about proving her shooting ability anymore. It had become a spectacle, a chance for the range's old guard to publicly humiliate the outsider who dared to challenge their authority. Rick Thornton stepped forward, his competition, jacket gleaming with patches from dozens of shooting contests. "Here's how it's going to work," he said, his voice carrying to the back of the crowd. 3 shooters, 5 rounds each at 1,000 yards. Best group wins. And when you lose," Mike Patterson added, grinning, "you admit you were wrong about military training, making you some kind of expert marksman." Jessica's hands trembled slightly as she began setting up her rifle. The weight of 30 pairs of eyes pressed down on her, and she could hear the whispered conversations rippling through the crowd. Phrases like "crazy woman" and "about time someone put her in her place" reached her ears. Steve Coleman took the first position, and Jessica watched as he settled into his shooting stance with practiced ease. His first shot was excellent, a solid hit in the 9 ring. The crowd murmured appreciatively. His second shot was even better, catching the edge of the 10 ring. By his 5th shot, he'd managed a respectable group that could be covered by a coffee cup. "Nice shooting, Steve," Dale called out, his voice carrying false joviality. "Let's see if Rick can do better." Rick's performance was flawless. 5 shots in a tight cluster, all within the 10 ring, with 3 of them nearly touching. The crowd erupted in applause, and Jessica felt her confidence wavering. These men weren't just good. They were exceptional. "Your turn, sweetheart," Dale said, his smile sharp as a blade. "Let's see what all that military training taught you." Jessica approached the firing line with legs that felt like lead. The crowd had grown quiet, waiting for her to fail. She could feel their expectations pressing down on her like a physical weight. This was it, the moment where she'd either prove herself or be exposed as a fraud. She settled into position, feeling the familiar weight of the rifle against her shoulder. Through her scope, the target looked impossibly small, a tiny black circle wavering in the heat shimmer. The wind had picked up since Steve and Rick had shot, adding another variable to the equation. Her first shot felt perfect as it left the barrel, but when she looked through the scope, she saw it had caught the edge of the 8 ring, A decent shot, but not exceptional. She heard someone in the crowd chuckle. "Nerves getting to you?" Dale called out. "It's okay, honey. Happens to the best of us." Jessica's second shot was worse, a solid 8-ring hit, but nowhere near the precision she'd need to compete with Rick's group. She could feel panic rising in her chest, the familiar sensation of everything falling apart at the worst possible moment. "Looks like reality's setting in," she heard Mike whisper to someone in the crowd. "Military marksmanship is just spray and pray. This is precision shooting." Jessica's third shot was a disaster, a 7-ring hit that drew audible groans from the crowd. She was falling apart in front of everyone, proving every skeptic right. The whispers grew louder, more confident. "Should we call it now?" Rick asked, his voice carrying false concern. "Save her the embarrassment?" "No," Jessica said, her voice barely audible. "I'm finishing," Dale shrugged. "Your funeral. But don't say we didn't warn you." Jessica's fourth shot was better, a solid 9-ring hit, but still nowhere near competitive. As she prepared for her final shot, she could hear the crowd beginning to disperse. The show was over, the outcome decided. She was exactly what they'd expected, a fraud who'd let her military service go to her head. But as she settled into position for her final shot, something shifted inside her. The noise of the crowd faded away, replaced by a familiar silence she remembered from Afghanistan. The silence of the hunt, of life and death decisions, made it impossible distances. The silence where she'd always found her true self. Her final shot was perfect, a dead-center 10-ring hit that drew surprised murmurs from what remained of the crowd. But it was too little, too late. Her group was mediocre at best, embarrassing compared to Rick's tight cluster. "Well," Dale said, his voice dripping with false sympathy, "that was educational. I think we've all learned something today about the difference between military training and real marksmanship." The crowd began to break up, conversations buzzing, with commentary about the military woman who thought she was Annie Oakley. Jessica felt humiliated, broken, smaller than she'd felt since leaving the army. She'd had her chance to prove herself, and she'd failed spectacularly. As she packed up her equipment, Rick approached her. "Look," he said, his voice almost gentle, "don't take it too hard. You're not the first person to discover that combat shooting and precision shooting are different things. Maybe stick to the shorter ranges for a while. Work on your fundamentals." Jessica nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She'd been broken, publicly humiliated, exposed as a fraud. But as she carried her rifle case back to her truck, a cold anger began to replace the shame. She'd let them get in her head, let their expectations become her reality. That night, Jessica sat in her small apartment, staring at the medals and commendations from her military service. She thought about the soldiers who'd trusted her, the lives she'd saved, the impossible shots she'd made when everything depended on it. She thought about the difference between performing for a crowd and performing when lives hung in the balance. And she began to plan. She called her former spotter, Marcus Johnson, who'd served with her in Afghanistan. "I need a favor," she said when he answered, "and I need you to keep it quiet." "What kind of favor?" Marcus asked. "The kind that's going to prove a point." Marcus Johnson arrived at Jessica's apartment on a Tuesday evening, carrying a worn duffel bag and wearing the same easy grin that had gotten them through 4 deployments together. He was a big man, built like a linebacker, but his hands were surgeon steady, the hands of a spotter who guided Jessica through some of the most difficult shots of her military career. "So," he said, settling into her kitchen chair, "you want to tell me what this is really about? Because your phone call sounded like you were planning to rob a bank." Jessica poured 2 cups of coffee and sat across from him. "I need you to help me with something. Something that's going to sound crazy. Crazier than that time you took out 3 insurgents at 900 meters while hanging upside down from a helicopter. That never happened. I know, but I like the story better than the truth. Marcus's smile faded as he studied her face. Talk to me, Jess. What's going on? Jessica told him about the range, about Dale and Rick and the others, about the humiliation, and the public failure. Marcus listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with each detail. So let me get this straight, he said when she finished. These weekend warriors think they're better than someone who served 4 tours as a designated marksman? They prove they're better, Jessica said bitterly. I choked, completely fell apart. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. You know what your problem was? I'm out of practice. Lost my edge. No. Marcus leaned forward. Your problem was that you were playing their game instead of your own. You were trying to impress them instead of just doing what you do. What I do doesn't work anymore, Jessica said. This is civilian life. Different rules. The same rules. As always, Marcus corrected. Breathe. Aim. Fire. Everything else is just noise. He opened his duffel bag and pulled out a small device that looked like a modified smartphone, which is why I brought this. Jessica recognized the device immediately, a ballistic computer she'd used in Afghanistan. Military-grade equipment. That calculated wind, temperature, humidity, and a dozen other variables that could affect long-range shooting. You stole that from the Army? Borrowed. Indefinitely. Marcus grinned. But that's not the interesting part. The interesting part is what I learned about your little shooting range while I was driving up here. He pulled out a folder filled with printouts and photographs. Riverside Shooting Range. Established 1987. Owner and operator Dale Henderson, who served 6 months in the National Guard before getting a medical discharge for flat feet. Jessica's eyes widened. Dale was never deployed? Never left stateside. But he's been telling people he's a veteran for years. Gets him respect. Gets him business. Marcus flipped through the papers. Rick Thornton, your main competition? Never. Served at all. Works as an accountant for an insurance company. Mike Patterson, construction foreman. Steve Coleman, sells cars. They're civilians, Jessica said, the pieces beginning to fall into place. Civilians who've convinced themselves and everyone else that they're some kind of elite. Marksmen because they can hit targets on sunny days with no pressure. Marcus pulled out another document. But here's the really interesting part. I did some research on competitive shooting records in this state. He spread out a series of competition results, his finger tracing down the names and scores. Rick Thornton has never placed higher than 5th in any major competition. Mike Patterson has never even entered a competition. Steve Coleman's best finish was 3rd place in a local match with 8 participants. Jessica stared at the documents, feeling something cold and sharp forming in her chest. They're not as good as they claim to be. They're decent shooters who've convinced themselves they're great because they've never been seriously challenged. They control their little kingdom, set the rules, and make sure they never face anyone who might actually be better than them. Until now, Jessica said quietly. Until now, Marcus smiled. So here's what we're gonna do. We're going to give you a chance to show them what real marksmanship looks like. But we're going to do it smart. Over the next 2 hours, Marcus laid out a plan that was both simple and devastating. They would return to the range, but this time, Jessica would be prepared. She'd have her ballistic computer, her real military training, and most importantly, she'd have the confidence that came from knowing exactly who she was facing. The key, Marcus explained, is not to let them control the situation. Don't let them set the terms, don't let them choose the conditions, and don't let them psych you out with their hometown crowd. How do I do that? Marcus's grin was predatory. By making them an offer they can't refuse. by challenging them to something they've never done before, by showing them what combat marksmanship really looks like. Jessica felt a familiar fire beginning to burn in her chest. What did you have in mind? Remember that trick you used to do in Afghanistan? The one that saved our unit when we were pinned down by that sniper? Jessica's eyes widened as she realized what he was suggesting. You want me to shoot blindfolded? I want you to show them that real marksmanship isn't about perfect conditions and unlimited time. It's about making impossible shots when everything is on the line. That's insane. That's exactly what makes it perfect. Marcus leaned back in his chair. These guys have spent years convincing themselves they're elite marksmen. They've never faced a real challenge because they've never allowed one. But you're about to give them something they've never seen before. Jessica thought about the humiliation she'd suffered, the way they'd dismissed her service, the way they'd made her doubt herself. What if I miss? Then you miss. But at least you'll miss doing something they don't have the courage to even attempt. Marcus stood up and headed for the door. I'll be back this weekend. We've got some practicing to do. As the door closed, behind him, Jessica sat alone in her apartment, staring at the military equipment spread across her kitchen table. For the first time since leaving the army, she felt like herself again. Not the uncertain veteran trying to find her place in civilian life, but the skilled marksman who'd made impossible shots when lives depended on it. She had a plan now. More than that, she had a purpose. And by the time she was done, everyone at Riverside Shooting Range would know exactly what a real soldier could do. The return to Riverside Shooting Range felt different this time. Jessica walked through the front door with Marcus at her side, both of them carrying the quiet confidence that comes from having a plan. The familiar smell of gun oil and cordite filled the air, but instead of the anxiety she'd felt before, Jessica experienced something closer to anticipation. Dale Henderson looked up from his paperwork, his expression shifting from surprise to barely concealed irritation. Well, look who's back. Thought you might have learned your lesson last time. I learned something, Jessica replied evenly. Just not what you think. Rick Thornton emerged from the back office, his competition jacket as pristine as always. Jessica, right? Back for more punishment? His tone was jovial, but Jessica caught the sharp edge underneath. Actually, Jessica said, I'm here to make you an offer. The conversation in the range's front area began to quiet as other shooters noticed the gathering tension. Mike Patterson and Steve Coleman drifted over, along with several other regulars who'd witnessed Jessica's previous humiliation. What kind of offer? Dale asked, his voice wary. Jessica took a deep breath, feeling Marcus's reassuring presence beside her. I want a rematch, but this time I choose the conditions. Rick laughed, but it sounded forced. You want to choose the conditions? You couldn't even hit the broadside of a barn last time. I had a bad day, Jessica said simply. Everyone has bad days, but I'm betting you've never had a day like what I'm about to show you. Dale leaned forward, his interest clearly piqued despite his skepticism. What exactly are you proposing? Same setup as before? 1,000 yards, 5 shots each. But this time, I shoot blindfolded. The silence that followed was so complete that Jessica could hear the distant sound of gunfire from the practice ranges. Then Mike Patterson let out a bark of laughter. Blindfolded? Are you completely insane? You want to shoot blindfolded? Dale's voice was incredulous. That's not marksmanship. That's a circus act. Is it? Jessica asked. Because where I come from, real marksmanship is about more than perfect conditions and unlimited time. It's about making shots when everything is stacked against you. Steve Coleman shook his head. This is ridiculous. You can't hit a target at 1,000 yards blindfolded. It's impossible. Maybe for you, Jessica said quietly. But I'm not you. The crowd of onlookers had grown, drawn by the increasingly heated conversation. Jessica could see the mix of emotions on their faces: skepticism, curiosity, and something that might have been hope from a few of the younger shooters who'd never seen the range's established order challenged. "Look," Rick said, his voice taking on a reasonable tone, "I understand you're frustrated about last time, but this is getting out of hand. Shooting blindfolded isn't just impossible, it's dangerous." "I'll take full responsibility for safety," Jessica said. "I'll have a spotter, and every shot will be carefully controlled." "A spotter?" Dale looked at Marcus for the first time, taking in his military bearing and confident stance. "And who exactly are you?" Marcus stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command. "Marcus Johnson, former Army Sergeant, designated spotter for the 173rd Airborne Brigade. I spotted for Jessica through 4 deployments and over 200 confirmed kills." The room went quiet again. Jessica could see the calculations happening behind Dale's eyes, the risk of allowing such a spectacle versus the potential for generating massive interest in his range. 200 confirmed kills? Steve's voice was barely above a whisper. "Confirmed and verified," Marcus said. "Jessica Martinez is one of the most skilled marksmen ever to serve in the U.S. Army." "What she's proposing isn't a circus act. It's a demonstration of combat marksmanship at its highest level." Dale's face had gone pale. 200 kills? "You're talking about 200 people?" "I'm talking about 200 shots that saved American lives," Jessica said, her voice steady. "Every shot was necessary. Every shot was precise. And every shot was made under conditions these gentlemen couldn't imagine." Rick's competition jacket seemed to lose some of its luster. "Combat shooting is different from precision shooting. We've established that, have we?" Jessica asked. "Because I'm about to show you what precision shooting really looks like." The tension in the room was palpable. Jessica could see the doubt creeping into the faces of the men who'd humiliated her just days before. The comfortable certainty they'd worn like armor was beginning to crack. "This is insane," Mike muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. "What's insane," Marcus said, "is thinking that hitting stationary targets on a calm day makes you an elite marksman. What's insane is dismissing someone's service record because it threatens your little kingdom." Dale's face flushed red. "Now, hold on just a minute." "No, you hold on," Jessica interrupted, her voice carrying a steel that made everyone in the room take notice. "You've spent weeks questioning my training, my service, my right to even be here. You've made assumptions about what I can and can't do based on nothing but your own prejudices." She looked around the room, meeting each man's eyes in turn. "I'm offering you a chance to see what real marksmanship looks like. Not range shooting, not competition shooting, but the kind of shooting that kept soldiers alive in combat. And if you miss?" Rick asked, his voice hoarse. "Then I miss," Jessica said. "But at least I'll miss attempting something none of you have the skill or courage to try." Dale looked around the room at the gathered crowd, then back at Jessica. She could see him weighing the risks and benefits. A successful blindfolded shot would be the kind of story that brought shooters from across the state to his range. A failure would be equally spectacular, but in a different way. "If we do this," he said finally, "it's under strict conditions. Full safety protocols, insurance waivers. And if there's even the slightest hint of danger, we shut it down immediately." Jessica nodded, agreed. "And when you fail," Rick added, "you admit that military training doesn't make you a better marksman than dedicated civilian shooters." "And when I succeed," Jessica countered, "you admit that you've been underestimating what real soldiers can do." The challenge hung in the air like a thrown gauntlet. Jessica could see the internal struggle on their faces, the part of them that wanted to back down, warring with the part that couldn't resist the chance to witness her failure. "Saturday," Dale said finally. "High noon. We'll set up proper safety protocols and get the insurance paperwork sorted out." As the crowd began to disperse, Jessica caught fragments of excited conversation. Word was already spreading about the impossible challenge, the female veteran who claimed she could hit a 1,000-yard target while blindfolded. By Saturday, the range would be packed. Rick approached her as she prepared to leave. "You know this is crazy, right? Even if you were the best sniper in the Army, shooting blindfolded is a completely different thing." Jessica looked at him steadily. "You're right. It is completely different. It's harder. Then why are you doing it?" Jessica considered the question for a moment. "Because someone needs to show you what you don't know you don't know." As she and Marcus walked toward the parking lot, Jessica felt the familiar pre-mission calm settling over her. She'd committed now. In 3 days, she would either prove herself beyond any doubt or fail, so spectacularly that she'd never be able to show her face at another shooting range. "You sure about this?" Marcus asked as they reached her truck. Jessica looked back at the range building, where she could see faces pressed against the windows, watching her leave. "I'm sure." "Good," Marcus said, "because we've got work to do." Saturday arrived with perfect weather-clear skies, minimal wind, and the kind of crisp autumn air that made long-range shooting a joy. Jessica arrived at Riverside Shooting Range to find the parking lot overflowing with vehicles. Cars, trucks, and motorcycles stretched along the access road, and she could see people streaming toward the range building. Word had spread far beyond. The regular shooters. The local newspaper had sent a reporter, and she spotted at least 3 people with professional cameras. Someone had set up a live stream, and the crowd numbered well over 100 people, the largest gathering in the range's history. Dale Henderson stood at the center of it all, his earlier skepticism replaced by the gleam of someone who recognized a potential goldmine. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced through a megaphone, "welcome to what might be the most incredible shooting demonstration you'll ever witness." Jessica felt the familiar pre-mission calm settling over her as she and Marcus made their way through the crowd. The whispered conversations followed her progress. "That's her. And she really thinks she can do it. And this is going to be embarrassing." Rick Thornton approached as she began setting up her equipment. He looked nervous, his usual confidence shaken by the magnitude of what was about to happen. "Listen," he said quietly, "it's not too late to call this off. Nobody would think less of you." "I would," Jessica replied, checking her rifle 0 for the 3rd time. The crowd had formed a semicircle around the 1,000-yard firing line, held back by temporary barriers that Dale had hastily erected. Jessica could feel the weight of their expectations, most hoping to witness her failure, but a few, she sensed, actually wanting to see something extraordinary. Marcus took his position beside her, his voice carrying the authority of countless missions. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you're about to witness is a demonstration of combat marksmanship at its highest level. This isn't a trick or a gimmick. This is how soldiers make impossible shots when lives depend on it." He gestured toward the target, barely visible as a black speck in the distance. 1,000 yards. 5 shots. Using only audio cues and muscle memory developed through years of combat experience, Dale's voice boomed through the megaphone. "For safety purposes, the range is completely cold. All other shooting has been suspended. The shooter will fire 5 rounds at the 1,000-yard target while blindfolded." Jessica felt someone approach and turned to see a middle-aged woman she didn't recognize. "Excuse me," the woman said quietly. "I'm Rebecca Torres from the Veterans Administration. I wanted you to know that there are several vets in this crowd pulling for you." Jessica nodded, touched by the unexpected support. She looked out at the crowd and spotted several people wearing military unit patches or veteran ball caps. She wasn't alone after all. "Ready?" Marcus asked. Jessica settled into her shooting position, feeling the familiar weight of the rifle against her shoulder. Through her scope, she could see the target clearly, a standard bullseye at what most people would consider an impossible distance. "Ready," she said. Marcus produced a dark cloth blindfold, and the crowd fell silent as he secured it over Jessica's eyes. The world went black, leaving only the sounds of wind, distant traffic, and the breathing of 100 spectators. "Target is at your 12 o'clock, Marcus said, his voice taking on the calm professionalism she remembered from Afghanistan. "Wind is 3 to 5 miles per hour, left to right. Temperature is 62 degrees. Humidity 40%. Jessica made minute adjustments to her position, her body remembering the countless hours of training that had made shooting as natural as breathing. In the darkness behind the blindfold, she could visualize the target, the trajectory of the bullet, the effect of every environmental factor. "Send it," Marcus said quietly. Jessica's finger found the trigger, applied steady pressure, and fired. The sound of the shot rolled across the range like thunder, followed by absolute silence. "Hit," Marcus announced, his voice carrying clearly in the stillness. 9 ring, 11 o'clock. A murmur ran through the crowd. Surprise, excitement, disbelief. Jessica chambered another round, made a slight adjustment based on Marcus's spot, and fired again. Hit. 10 ring. Center mass. The murmur became a buzz of conversation. Someone in the crowd shouted, "Holy shit!" before being quickly shushed. Jessica's third shot felt perfect as it left the barrel. She knew before Marcus spoke that it had found its mark. Hit. X-ring. Dead center. The crowd was no longer trying to stay quiet. Exclamations of amazement rippled through the gathered spectators. Jessica could hear cameras clicking, reporters speaking into phones, and Dale Henderson's voice saying, "I can't believe it," over and over. Her fourth shot was another X-ring hit, so close to the third that Marcus had to use binoculars. To confirm it was a separate hole. 4 for 4, all in the 10 ring or better, Marcus announced. 1 shot remaining. Jessica took a deep breath, feeling the absolute silence that had descended over the range. 100 people holding their breath, waiting to see if she could complete what many had considered impossible. In the darkness behind her blindfold, Jessica found the zone she'd inhabited in Afghanistan, the place where training, instinct, and years of experience merged into something approaching perfection. She thought about the soldiers she'd served, with the lives that depended on her skill, the moment when everything came down to a single shot. Her final shot was the best of the day. Even before Marcus spoke, Jessica knew it had found the exact center of the target. Hit. X-ring. Dead. Center. Marcus's voice was thick with emotion. 5 for 5. All shots in the 10 ring or better, with 3 X-ring hits. The crowd erupted. People were cheering, applauding, shouting questions, and taking pictures. Jessica removed her blindfold to find herself surrounded by faces displaying everything, from amazement to shock to something approaching awe. Dale Henderson pushed through the crowd. His earlier skepticism completely vanished. That was incredible. I've never seen anything like that in 30 years of running this range. Rick Thornton appeared at Jessica's shoulder, his face pale. How? He asked simply. Training, Jessica replied. The kind of training you can only get when missing means people die. Mike Patterson and Steve Coleman stood at the edge of the crowd, their earlier confidence completely shattered. The men who'd questioned her service, her skill, her right to be there now looked like children who'd discovered the world was much larger and more dangerous than they'd imagined. Rebecca Torres from the VA pushed through the crowd with tears in her eyes. That was for all of us, she said, embracing Jessica. Thank you. As the crowd began to disperse, Buzzing with excitement and disbelief, Jessica began packing her equipment. She felt calm, complete, vindicated. She'd proven everything she'd needed to prove to them, but more importantly, to herself. Dale approached her one final time. "Listen," he said, his voice subdued. "I owe you an apology. We all do." I had no idea what real marksmanship looked like. Jessica nodded, accepting the apology for what it was worth. Most people don't. As she and Marcus walked toward the parking lot, Jessica could hear the conversations continuing behind them. The story of the female veteran who'd hit a 1,000-yard target 5 times while blindfolded would be told and retold, growing in legend with each telling. But for Jessica, the real victory wasn't in the impossible shots or the stunned silence of her critics. It was in the knowledge that she was still exactly who she'd always been: a soldier, a marksman, and someone who could do things others couldn't even imagine. 3 months after the demonstration, Jessica Martinez sat in the passenger seat of her pickup truck, watching Marcus load the last of her equipment into the back. The morning sun cast long shadows across the grounds of the new tactical training facility she'd opened on the outskirts of town, a place where military veterans could practice real-world marksmanship skills without judgment or condescension. "You sure you don't want to stick around for the grand opening?" Marcus asked, securing the rifle cases with bungee cords. "Half the Special Forces community is going to be here." Jessica smiled, adjusting the rearview mirror to catch a glimpse of the facility behind them. The sign read, "Precision Point Training Center," and beneath it, in smaller letters, "Combat Marksmanship for Military and Law Enforcement." The parking lot was already filling with vehicles bearing license plates from 3 states. "You've got it handled," Jessica said. "Besides, I've got somewhere to be." The drive to Riverside Shooting Range took 20 minutes, and Jessica spent the time thinking about everything that had changed since that Saturday afternoon when she'd proven herself in front of 100 skeptical witnesses. The video of her blindfolded shooting had gone viral, racking up millions of views and turning her into something of a celebrity in the shooting community. More importantly, it had opened doors. Military contractors had reached out with job offers. Law enforcement agencies wanted her to train their snipers. Veterans groups had invited her to speak about transitioning to civilian life and maintaining confidence in a world that didn't always understand what soldiers brought to the table. But the most satisfying change was the one she was about to witness. Jessica pulled into the Riverside parking lot to find it busier than she'd ever seen it. The difference was immediately apparent, along with the usual collection of pickup trucks and SUVs. She could see several vehicles with military unit stickers and veteran plates. The demographic of the range had shifted dramatically in the months since her demonstration. Inside, the atmosphere was completely different. Where once there had been an exclusive, almost hostile environment, Jessica now found a welcoming space, where military veterans trained alongside civilian shooters, sharing knowledge and techniques that benefited everyone. Dale Henderson looked up from the front desk as she entered, his face breaking into a genuine smile. "Jessica, good to see you. How's the new facility?" "Grand opening is today," Jessica replied. "Thought I'd stop by and see how things are going." "Here, better than ever," Dale said, and Jessica could see he meant it. "We've had more military folks come through in the past 3 months than in the previous 3 years. Your demonstration really put us on the map." A young woman in army fatigues approached the counter, her manner confident but respectful. "Excuse me," she said to Dale. "I'm looking for some practice time on the long-range facility. I heard this place has some of the best distances in the state." "Absolutely," Dale replied. "First time here?" "Yes, sir. Just got back from deployment. Trying to stay sharp while I'm stateside." Dale's demeanor was completely different from the condescending attitude Jessica remembered. "Well, you've come to the right place. We've got everything from 100 yards out to 1,200 yards. And if you need any pointers on long-range shooting, Rick Thornton over there has been working with a lot of military folks lately. Jessica looked toward the range area and saw Rick helping a group of veterans sight in their rifles. His competition jacket was still pristine, but his attitude had undergone a complete transformation. He listened more than he talked, asked questions about combat conditions, and seemed genuinely interested in learning from people who'd used their marksmanship skills in life-and-death situations. Rick's become quite the student, Dale said, following Jessica's gaze. After your demonstration, he realized he had a lot to learn about real-world marksmanship. He's been training with some of your veteran friends, trying to understand what combat shooting actually involves. Jessica nodded, pleased but not surprised. The best shooters were always eager to learn, regardless of where that knowledge came from. Mike Patterson emerged from the back office, his bulky frame unchanged, but his manner completely different. Jessica, he called out, approaching with a warm smile. Heard about your new facility. That's fantastic. If you ever need any construction work done, I'd be honored to help out. I appreciate that, Mike. Listen, Mike said, his voice more serious. I want to apologize again for how we treated you when you first came here. We were well. We were ignorant. I had no idea what real military marksmanship involved. Jessica had heard similar apologies dozens of times over the past 3 months, from the men who'd initially dismissed her to strangers who'd seen the video online. You didn't know what you didn't know, she said simply. That's not a crime. Maybe not, but it was wrong. Mike looked out toward the range, where several groups of mixed military and civilian shooters were working together. What you did that day changed everything. Not just here, but for a lot of us who thought we knew what good shooting looked like. Steve Coleman approached from the ammunition counter, carrying a box of match-grade bullets. His car salesman confidence had been replaced by something more authentic, the humility that came from recognizing true expertise. Jessica, good to see you. I wanted to thank you for recommending my daughter for that shooting scholarship. It means a lot to our family. Jessica remembered the conversation. Steve's teenage daughter had shown real talent with a rifle, and Jessica had connected her with a program that provided training and financial support for young competitive shooters. She's got natural ability. With the right training, she could go far. She's been training with some of the veterans who come here now, Steve said, learning things about precision shooting that I never even knew existed. Makes me realize how much I had to learn. As Jessica walked through the range, she was struck by the transformation. Where once there had been rigid hierarchies and dismissive attitudes, she now found collaborative learning environments where knowledge flowed freely between military and civilian shooters. The exclusive boys' club had evolved into something more inclusive and ultimately more effective. At the 1,000-yard range, she found a familiar figure setting up a rifle with methodical precision. It was Rebecca Torres from the VA, the woman who'd supported her during the Blindfolded demonstration. Rebecca, I didn't expect to see you here. Rebecca looked up with a smile. Your demonstration inspired me to get back into shooting. I did some competitive work in college, but never anything serious. Figured it was time to see what I could really do. They spent the next hour shooting together, Jessica offering advice and encouragement while Rebecca worked on her long-range technique. It was a perfect example of what the range had become, a place where experience was shared and skills were developed through mutual support rather than competition and exclusion. As the afternoon wore on, Jessica found herself thinking about the journey that had brought her to this point. The humiliation of her first visit to Riverside had been painful, but it had also been necessary. It had forced her to confront her own doubts, to reconnect with the skills that defined her, and ultimately to prove to herself that she was still the marksman she'd always been. More than that, it had shown her that she had something valuable to offer in civilian life, not just her technical skills, but her ability to bridge the gap between military and civilian shooting communities. As she prepared to leave, Dale approached her one final time. "You know," he said, "I've been thinking about that day when you first came in here. If I could go back and do it over—" "You'd do exactly the same thing," Jessica interrupted, not unkindly, "because you didn't know any better. The important thing is that you learned." Dale nodded thoughtfully. "I guess what I'm trying to say is thank you. You could have just walked away after we treated you badly. Instead, you showed us what we were missing. This place is better because of what you did." Jessica looked around the range one final time at the veterans training alongside civilians, at the respectful atmosphere that had replaced the old exclusivity, at the evidence of everything that had changed since that day when she'd made 5 impossible shots while blindfolded. "It's better," she agreed, because everyone was willing to learn. As she drove away from Riverside Shooting Range for the last time, Jessica felt a deep sense of completion. She'd proven everything she'd needed to prove, not just about her marksmanship skills, but about her ability to find her place in the civilian world. The angry, uncertain veteran who'd first walked into that range 3 months ago had been replaced by someone confident in her abilities and clear about her purpose. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Grand opening is going great. When are you getting back? We've got 3 more facilities wanting to hire us for training programs." Jessica smiled as she typed her response. "On my way. Ready to get back to work." The road ahead stretched out before her, full of possibilities. She'd found her mission in civilian life training others, bridging communities, and proving that the skills learned in military service had value far beyond the battlefield. She was no longer trying to fit into someone else's idea of what a veteran should be. She was defining it for herself. In the rearview mirror, Riverside Shooting Range disappeared behind a stand of trees, but the lessons learned there would stay with her forever. Sometimes, the most important victories came not from defeating enemies, but from overcoming the doubts of those who didn't believe in what you could do. And sometimes, the best way to prove your worth was to hit the target when everyone was certain you'd miss. Jessica Martinez drove toward her future, confident in her aim and certain of her purpose. She'd found her place in the world, one perfect shot at a time. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.